Begin the current Daf, Mesech's Bava Metzia Daf Chav. We begin 6 lines down from the top of the Yamud. The Gemara is in the middle of the famous conversation of the machlokes between Abai and Rava of Yiyah Shaloi Midas. If a person, had he known, he would have given up hope, but he didn't know yet, and someone else picked it up, do we consider that as Yish or not? It's machlokes Abai and Rava. And the Gemara continues to try to bring proofs from different sources, Bryce and Mishnayos, regarding this halacha, which ultimately the Gemara ends up resolving who the halacha is like. And then the Gemara ends off by going back to the halacha of the Mishnah and discussing the halachas of siman, specifically regarding siman asl daris. If there is a siman that would be trampled on, would that be considered as a siman or not? And also regarding makim, is makim a siman where it is? And regarding how would you go ahead and give a siman of makim? But that would begin the current daf Chav Beis. 6 lines down from the top of the It says, Tashema. Let's bring a raya to Abaya, who Abaya held that Yish Shalom Midas loy have a Yish, because ultimately you didn't know, you didn't give hope, and then the guy picked it up beforehand, and therefore it's not going to be considered as Yish, and you would have to do Hashavas Aveda from the following Brisa. The Brisa says, Shotef Nohar, if a river washed away, Kairav, his beams, Eitzav, his wood, Vavanov, and his stones, meaning of one person, and he put it into his friend's field, and the other person finds it. What's the halacha? Says the Brisa Harei Shaloi. It's his, and it's literally, you have to read this a little bit closely. Harei Shaloi, it's his, because the owner gave up hope, as Rashi explains, because anytime the river floods, person's beams, his wood, his stone, the owners know about it right away, because the word gets out that the river flooded his stuff, and therefore he already gave up hope. Okay, says the Gemara, it sounds like time within Nisyayishu Habayim. Sounds like, okay, because the owners found out about it, and they gave up hope, that's why you could keep it. Hastama, but let's say if it was something else that got lost, where we can't necessarily say that the owner knows, then it sounds like loy. Then it wouldn't be the one who found it, and therefore that's difficult to Rava, because of the halacha of Yiyah Shalom Midas. According to Rava, why would you say because the owners gave up hope, which is because they know about it, even if they didn't know about it, since if they would be miyayish, according to Rava, should anyways be Harei Shaloi. Which Taisus explains, he says, what the Gemara is saying is, the Gemara is reading the Brisa, Im Nisyayishu Habaylam, that is, and this is very important, the way Taisus reads it, just to understand it a little bit easier, the Gemara, is that the owner was there at the time when his beams were being flooded down the river, and he didn't chase after it. Even if they say, oh, we're not giving up hope, that's nothing, because most definitely they were giving up in their heart. That's how the Gemara is understanding the Brisa. And then the Gemara is making the dig hastama, meaning if the owner wasn't there at the time that it was flooded, and he didn't give up hope until the owners found out about it that it had flooded, and then he can't save it anymore because it doesn't have a siman, then lie, meaning when the guy who finds it, it already came to him in a prohibited status because the owner didn't know yet. Oh, so obviously we see that Yish Shalom Midas is not Yish. So that's how Tais explains a little bit finer, as we'll see in a moment, how the Gemara answers. So it sounds like it's difficult on Rava. Says the Gemara, no. The diuk that we're saying regarding stama, not when we know the owner was miyayish, that we're saying wouldn't be that we would say that the guy wouldn't be able to keep it, is kishiyachal, or the girser actually some bring down is b'shiyachalin. Depends really how you're explaining the Gemara. B'shiyachalin or kishiyachal hatzal, when he could have saved it, when he could save it. So, as Rashi explains, the equivalent by a different Mציעא, what would that mean when you could save it? When you could save it is like a reference to say that, let's say you have a siman. You could save it even though it got it's got something happened to it, got lost. because you could identify it, so you're not going to be miyayish, because you could give a sim and you could take it. Oh, there says Rava, I agree that of course in that case you would have to give it back because it's not yish. And the same thing would be Shloimy Das when he doesn't know about it. Which is, however, the case of the Brisa, since you cannot save it, so therefore it would be yish. The diak is, when we're saying hastama, stama means to say when, if you could save it, as Taisa explains, he says, you could save it even after it got flooded. For example, if let's say the lost object has a siman, that the owner would not be miyayish when they would find out. So it's not a case of yish limidas because the person wouldn't be miyayish. So says the Gemara, if that's the case, the Ima Seifa, look at the Seifa of the Brisa. The Brisa continues, it says, if the owner was chasing after it, then it's showing that he's not giving up hope. Oh, then chayav lahaksa, then you have to give it back. Now, says the Gemara, if you're explaining to me the case of the Brisa, where the guy could save it, that's when he has to give it back. So why are you then mentioning that you'll give it back to him when he's chasing after it? Even if he's not chasing after it, he's relying on the fact that he could save it tomorrow or the following day, and he's not going to give up hope. Or, as Taisa explains, that even if the owner was there at the time when it was flooded, and he didn't chase after it, you should also give it back, because he could save it. Says the Gemara, no, what are we talking about over here? He could only save it with great difficulty. And if he doesn't run to save it, says Rashi, he's not going to be able to save it. So therefore, miradfen, if the guy's running after it, so lo yayish, he's not going to give up hope because he'll be able to save it. So even though if he doesn't end up, but he's showing that he's not being miyayish. Ein miradfen, if he's not running after it, then the yuyish and miyayish, then obviously he's giving up hope and he's being mafkrid because he knows about it and he's not saving it. Or as Taisa explains, he says that even though there's a simon, but since he's only could save it like that chak, it's going to be great difficulty that he's going to be able to save it because it's getting really far down that the river is taking it. So therefore, if he was there at the time that it was flooded and he's not running after it, for sure he's miyayish because since now he could save it without difficulty and he's not saving it, so obviously it's showing that he's really giving up hope on it. So that's why he's not chasing it. But if the owner wasn't there when it was flooded, then you have to give it back because when the owner would find out, he would not be miyayish because then he would save it, albeit with great difficulty. So therefore, again, a little bit of a complex reading, but that's why it's not difficult on Rava, because the reason why hastam alai, meaning if you didn't have the case of the Brisa, then it wouldn't be arei l'shalai, you would have to give it back, is because the guy could save it, and that explains why if he's running after it, you have to give it back. We said, why have to run after it? We said, yeah, because if he's there, since it's only could save with great difficulty, again, depending how you explain it, Rashi Taisa, but why not running after it right now? That must be a miyayish. But if he's not there, then no, then the guy wouldn't be miyayish because he could still save it. But al diatzchak, and therefore that's why you would have to give it back. But when the owner's there and he's miyayish, like the Brisa says, then yeah, harei l'shalai. But it's not that stama loy, and that in general, anytime you had yish shalai medas, it would not be yish, and you'd have to give it back like a bay, not like Rava. No, it's only because, Rava says I agree in such a case, that since you could get it back, you could save it, so then, it's not been miyayish. So Shlomi Das wouldn't make it into yish, and therefore you would have to return it. So there's no raya to abaya. But says, okay, Toshma Gemara says, let's bring another raya, this time to Rava, from the following brisa. Ketzad Amru, how did they say, Hatoichim Shlomi Das, if someone takes truma without the owner's awareness from his produce, that truma say truma, that it's going to be a valid truma. So the Brisa says, I'll explain to you when that was said. If someone goes into his friend's field, and he gathers for the purposes of the homeowner, and then he takes truma without the owner's permission. So it depends. If the owner's concerned and he's bothered by what this person did, mishum gezel, because of robbery, that he went and took off his truma without his permission, then ain't truma se truma. Then it's not a valid truma. But if he is not bothered by, he's like, you ganav, what are you coming in taking truma, giving to the kahanim. If he's not bothered by it, then truma then it's going to be a valid truma. Now says the Brayse Menayin Hu Yedeya, and from how do we know if the owner is thinking that you're a ganav and you're taking it or not? So we could tell from his behavior. What does that mean? So Harisha Baba Labai Mitzvah. So if let's say the owner comes and he sees what's going on over here, the guy he gathered all his produce. He thought he's a big tzaddik. He did all the work for me, and then he gave truma to the kohen. So if the owner comes along and he tells to the guy, oh, you should have gone to the better stuff to give to the kohen from my better quality stuff. So it depends. If you actually find that there are better ones that he could have taken truma for, so truma say truma. So it shows that, he really wanted you what you gave. He's saying, oh, you should have given them even better. So therefore, it's valid what you had done. But if there is no better, and he's saying you should have given from the better, then actually ain't truma say truma. Then it's not going to be a valid truma. Why is that? Because Rashi and Kedushin says, as some Gemaras bring on the side, that what he was really telling him was that, and if you would have found better ones, you would have taken that also. B'stama Gazlan. He said, what are you doing? You're taking you're emptying me out here for my highest quality stuff. What are you thinking? Who do you think you are? Now that's regarding if he uses speech. But let's say the owner, when he comes along, he doesn't even say anything. But liktu habaylim, the owner then, after he sees that this guy took truma for the kahanim, he goes and he gathers himself. And then he adds on truma to what the other person had taken. Then actions speak louder than words. Then whether there are better ones or there's not better ones, truma, it's going to be valid truma because he's showing that he's happy with what they did, and he's adding on. As in by the Megillah, they say Hadu Kiblu. They say, how do you know Hadu Kiblu? Because they added on the mitzvah onto the Torah. Megillah says to Mizayin that you were okay with whatever was done, and you're adding on. If you're adding on, you're showing that you're okay with whatever was done, and you're making even more. So the Gemara concludes and says, okay, but that's the Brayse. So how does it relate to the Machlekes Abai and Rav and Yish Limitas? But you said that, okay, when the guy said, you should have taken from the better stuff. And we said, if you find that there's better stuff, then Truma, then it comes out that it's okay, the Truma, he's okay with what the guy had done, and it's going to be a valid Truma. Says, how does that work? Be'idna the Tarm, when this guy, this random guy, walked into the guy's field and he took up Truma, the owner didn't know yet what this guy had done. So what do you see? Obviously, we see that when he finds out if he's okay with it, as we said, because from his words we could indicate that he's okay with it, we say that means in the beginning he was also okay with it. So then we could compare regarding the halachas of Yish also. Since if when he's going to know about it, he would give up hope, we say in the beginning also he would give up hope. That's like Rava, not like Abaya. So actually, Tirgama Rava Alibad Abaya. So although Rava has a proof now, he goes and, as I learned, Alibad Emes, he says, no, it's not a raya to me. Rava translates for Abaya that the Brayse is not difficult on the Abaya, says the Shavi Shliach. This person that went and took of Truma was actually that the owner had made him a Shliach. So there's no Shalom Midas over here to say, you see that if he's okay and he didn't know about it. No, this guy knew about it. As we're going to explain in a second, so if he knew about it, so what's going on over here where he says, I'm not okay or I am okay with him, but he had made him a Shliach to take of Truma. It says, it's actually logical to say like this. So it's nothing to do with the Machlekes Abai and Rava on Shalom Midas. Because the Isa could if you would think to say that you read the Brayse simply, as it sounds like that the guy just came on his own and he wasn't appointed an agent by the owner, you have a truma, say truma. You think it would ever be a truma? But va'atem gam atem am rachmana. The Torah says, "Kain terimu, so too you should take truma gam atem, also you." Which from here the Gemara learns out what's the extra word gam? L'rabba shluchachem, to include a person's agent that shliach shel adam is kamaisa regarding the halachas of truma, that the shlich that he takes up truma, it's a valid truma. Now, since here's where we learn that the halach of shlichas, obviously that your agent has to be similar to you, which is ma atam l'daitchem, just like you, your truma is only with your consciousness, with your intention of shlichachem l'daitchem. So to your agent has to be that the owner appointed him a shliach. So therefore, this halacha is even like Abaya because there's no shalom midas over here. So then the Gemara is trying to figure out. So So if that's the case, so what's this? What's it, where he's coming along and he's saying he's okay? He's not okay. What do you mean? You made him an agent? No. Yes, he made him an agent. So then why is it possible that his truma is not a truma? Because Amalei he had told him zil Torah. He told him, take off truma. He didn't tell him take truma from the best stuff. Because the stomach, the balabayis, gitarim, the presumption we have when a regular homeowner takes up truma, that you should take off in the middle grade. But also you were Trami office, and he went along and he took up truma from the highest quality stuff. And the owner comes along and he finds him. Amalei says, you should have gone to the best. So that's what we're saying. If you find this better stuff, truma, because that's showing that his intent was even for higher quality stuff. But there's no Shloimy Das over here on the truma. But if not, in truma, then it's not going to be about truma because he says, for that I didn't make you as a shliach, which Taisus in Divrei Maschil B'Mlav actually asks, says this is a Gemara that's brought many times, it's in Super Tzaddik Test, that we say that a regular balabais would give 1 out of 50. If the shliach gives 10 more or 10 less, we say it's a valid truma, because they could say, that's how I evaluated you. So why don't you say the same thing over here? Like, what's the problem that he didn't give, like he gave higher quality and you're upset and therefore it's not going to be a truma? I thought we say he could say b'hachi amadatich. So it says that, no, that's all included in the shiur of truma. Some give like this, some give like that. So he could say, since you didn't tell me, I evaluated you as that type of person. But from the yafis, from the best, that's not normal for a person to take off truma. And therefore he should never have taken off such a truma without his rishos, and therefore he can invalidate it. But again, there's nothing to do with the machlekes Abai and Rava. It's not the guy came on his own, the guy didn't know about it, and then he's like, wow, okay, I'm so happy you did this. Oh, you see, even though Shloimy does that it was valid. No, he had made him a shliach. He could just invalidate him as a shliach if he went and took off from the highest quality stuff. You shouldn't have taken that. And like we say many times, the shliach is, I only made you for my good, not for my bad, but nothing to do with machlekes Abai and Rava. The Gemara brings a story related to this. A Meimer, Umazutra, Viravashi, these 3 Talmidei Chachamim, Iklo lebustino the Mori bar Asik. They went to the orchard of Mori bar Asik, that was his name, and Aisi Arisa, his sharecropper, brought tamri, v'remoini, dates, and pomegranates for the Rebbes, v'shodi kamayu, and they put in front of them for paydas tish. A Meimer v'Ravashi achli, they ate. Mazutra le'achel, he didn't eat because it's stolen goods. Because the owner didn't know about it. This is the sharecropper who's working over there. And in the meantime, also Mori bar Asik, the owner comes along. Ashkechinu, he finds them. And he tells to his sharecropper, he says, why didn't you bring to the rabbis from the best stuff? You bring him stam, what's here? You should have given from that part of the grove the highest quality stuff. So now the 2 Talmidei Chacham who ate said to Mazutra, okay, now why is the master not eating? But Tanya will learn the Braisa, which we just quoted before, in Nimtzu Yafis Man, we said if this guy went and took off Truma, and the guy says, no, you should have taken from the owner said you should have taken from the best one. And there are better ones, so Truma said Truma. We say that it's going to be a valid Truma. So obviously he's revealing his intention that he's okay with it. So here also he's revealing his intention that he was okay with it with what was already given. So now for sure what he gave us is okay, just like we said for the laws of Truma. We said to them, no, Hacham Rabba. What Rabba says is, Lo Amru Klach Eitzel Yafas. We didn't say this halacha of Gilu Das, of revealing his intention, Ella in your Truma Bolvat. It was only said in the context of that Braisa, which the halachas of Truma, from the mitzvah, who benichlik, it's the mitzvah, and the guy is pleased that his mitzvah should be done at the highest level. Aval Hacha, but over here, Mishim Kisifu Suhudamahachi, he's only saying because he's embarrassed, because he's saying he sees the Rebbe is all sitting here, and he's like, he's ashamed of not to say that, so he says that. But it doesn't mean anything that he's okay with what was done, and therefore I'm not going to eat from it because it's Gezela. No, he's giving. Here he didn't give it. No, but this was already given. It was already given without his das by his sharecropper. So now saying retroactive, that was still a Maisa Gezela. That wouldn't say that, if he gives now on his own, that we don't have to be concerned for. What has to be the what has to be the better one and not better by Truma? Yeah, by Truma. Right. That's not this story. I mean, this story is not truma. This story is not truma. This story is some guy giving from the orchard to the Talmidei Chachamim, and he wanted to bring a raya from truma, and says no, truma is different. Truma is a leniency.
How could that not? Why is that not part of that? But if it was better ones, it wasn't. If you didn't specify, then maybe it's not part of that.
I hear what you're saying, right? But I'm saying that's what saying that. He says that you asked me to. Ladatzim is on the shlichus shabai. Right, and he made him a shliach. He could just invalidate it. Says why l'tevasi v'loy lavasi, says the Gemara. Like I didn't make you to make things worse. What are you thinking? That's not what I had in mind. So he could undo it. He could invalidate it, but it's not a chesaron in the ladatchem of the shlichus because he was a shliach. Toshima says, okay, let's try to bring another raya. This time Tabayam from a brisa that discusses if someone brings up his produce to the roof, and they would bring it up to dry out over there, and the dew fell on it. So it says the brisa like this: if the dew, the moisture is still on the produce, v'sameach, and he's rejoicing with the dew that fell on it. There's a pasuk in Vayikra that says v'chiyutan ma'im al-zera, when water is going to be placed on the food, on the seeds, v'nafal min the and then the tumah falls on the food item, it's going to be tameh. Which halacha that hechsher tumah, a food item only becomes susceptible to tumah once it comes in contact with a liquid. Now that you and now that you were happy, I mean you want this dew on this produce, so it qualifies for chiyutan that it was already came in contact with liquid, and now it could be mekabel tumah. But if nigvu, if it already dried before you find it, you come up at 11 o'clock, you wake up, and noch shachris, and you come there and you see it's tzedek and already it's dry. So avabisha sameach, even though you're happy now that you heard that during the night there was dew, but there's a contingent bays, it's not going to qualify for kiyutan that the liquid was put on it. And we don't say that, since now you're pleased, it helps your consciousness for what was, and then it should be susceptible to tumah, retroactive. No, we don't say that. Says what's the reason? Isn't because we don't say since it's revealed the hashta nichale that now he's so pleased with it, that before he was also okay with it. We don't say that. That's difficult in Rava because since you didn't know. So it couldn't activate what the halacha would be when you're pleased with a liquid. You have to be pleased with it, as we're going to explain in a moment, that with the liquid on it that makes it susceptible to tumah. You didn't know, so it couldn't activate it, just like we see. So therefore, yish midas, seemingly should also be lo have a yish. Says the Gemara, no, shani hasam. There, that halacha is different because the chsiv kiyiten. It's actually not written kiyutan. There's no vav over there in the pasuk. It's actually a shuruk. It's written kiyiten, which means ad sheyitin, until you put it on. So yes, oftentimes halacha would allow it that when you didn't do it, you're just pleased with it, that retroactive it could work. But here it says in the active, when he will place the water on it, so therefore that's why it's not going to qualify. So the Gemara says, wait, if that's the case, then what do you do with the Reisha? The Reisha said when you come up in the morning, 11 o'clock after your shachas and your breakfast, and you see the dew's on it, it's still on it, we said, then it's Mekalpa Tumah. Wait, Minami, there also, it came by itself. So why is it a hechsher over there? I thought it says ki'itin, that you have to put on the water. So Zimana Hasim could drop Papa. That's like Rav Papa, because it's actually somewhere in the middle. Rav Papa Rama, he posed a contradiction, so to speak. Siv ki'itin, the pasuk, the way it's written is ki'itin, when he will put on. But v'kerinan kiyutan, but the way you read in the Torah is yutan, as if there was a vav. So haketzat. So do you have to put on the water, or could it even be put on passively? Says the Gemara, yes, it's both. What does that mean? The it being placed on has to be similar to you putting it on. What does that mean? There's a characteristic over here. Mayitin ladas, just like when you're putting it on, it's with your consciousness. Of kiyutan nami ladas, when it is placed, also has to be with your consciousness, meaning that you know about it being put on, and it was prepared in front of your eyes, and when the dew is still on it, that, says Rashi, is still with its nesina, and therefore that's why when you come up at 11 o'clock in the morning, you see the dew still on it, and you're like, oh, shmak, I'm happy that it got moist. Now it's going to make it a better quality. So now that's kiyutan dum yudechiyitain, because it's placed on, and you know about it. But when you come at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and you see it totally dry, but you heard about it before, so even if we'll hold like Rava that maybe Yish Limidas have a Yish, that since if you would have known retroactively, it's like you did. But here the Torah says kiyite, although it's read kiyutan, but I have to have somewhat of a quality of like you doing it. It's only when the water is on it, with your das. But generally, even Shloimy das, you're right. Maybe we would say it's as if you did have your das. So it's no raya. No, not the field, because it has to be disconnected. But let's say he comes on the roof and it's moist, so then yeah, that's a makabel tumah. The Gemara says, okay, Toshma, let's try to bring another raya, this time to Abaya, from the teaching of the Amr Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shmuel ben Yehoy Tzaddik. He says, Minayin la'aveda, from where do we know we're getting a lost object? Sheshat v'nahar, that the river floods it, shimuteres, that it's permitted. It says in the pasuk in the Varm regarding the halacha of Hashavas Aveda, which is obviously the theme of these parakim. So too you should do for his donkey. So too you should do for his clothing. So you should do for all the lost objects of your brother. If it's lost from him, and you find it. Now the word mimenu is superfluous. It doesn't have to say that's lost from him. What do you mean lost from him? It's lost, and you find it. So that's coming to teach you the halacha that misha v'dehemenu. It's only if it's lost from him, but a Mציעא it's kaladam, but other people, it is found by then, which just happens to be lost from him. It could be 100 people around. He doesn't know where it is, lost from him, but it's found by others. That's when you're chayv hashavas aveda. Yatzazu, that excludes the case of when the river is flooding it. Shavu demimenu ve'ein Mציעא it's kaladam. It's not only lost from everyone. No one can get it. The river is taking it away from everyone. That's when it's going to be permitted. You don't have to return it over there. Okay. Now, since from one person we're learning out the halacha that when it's found by other people, it's just lost from that person. You have to return it. And when it's not found by other people, said that you could keep it. So essentially, the pasuk is comparing the two of them from the inference, one for Isser, one for Heter. One is when it's Mציעא it's kaladam, that you have to return it. One is when it's not Mציעא it's kaladam, that you can keep it. So the pasuk in the same pasuk, so it's comparing the two halachas to teach you mahateira, just like when it's permitted. Meaning, when we say it's not Mציעא it's a kaladam, when the river floods it, when it's permitted for you to keep it, the Torah did not differentiate between the ispa siman and between the less siman. Shara, whether there's siman or not doesn't make a difference. It could have a siman from today to the moon. It's still going to be permitted because the Torah is telling you if it's not Mציעא it's kaladam, then you could keep it. Oh, sa'afi surah. Then also when it's prohibited for you to keep it, when you have to return it, which is when it is found by other people, the pasuk is not differentiating between the ispa siman, whether if there is a siman, meaning when there is a siman, if the guy would know about it, obviously he would not be miyayish. Or, and this is the main point because this is going to end the Gemara's discussion, obeying the lespa siman. And even if there's no siman, which if he would know, he would be miyayish, it's still going to be asura. It's going to be forbidden, where you could say that he didn't know that it fell before it came to the hand of the other person, even though there's no siman. Oh, tiyufta de Rava, tiyufta. That's a refutation of Rava, because we see that there is going to be a case that we're comparing when it's us of you to keep it, as we're comparing it to the case of Heter when you're allowed to keep it, that just like Heter, there's going to be a case, which is, let's say, the river flooding it, there's no difference if there's a siman or not, you could keep it. So it must be there's a case of Isser, when it doesn't make it, if there's siman or not, that you have to give it back. According to Rava, there's never such a case. If there's no siman, you don't have to give it back, because the guy would have been miyayish. Oh, you see, it refutes Rava. And therefore the halacha is what's called biyal kagam. What's yal kagam? It's an acronym for 6 halachas. The first one, the yud, is the case we're discussing over here of yiyush Shloimy das. Halacha is like a baya, that it's not yush and you have to return it. The ayin refers to halacha of eid zaymim. Do we say that he's only puzzle mikan labah from here on, or lemafreya, that it becomes puzzle retroactive, as the Gemara discussed in Sanhedrin of Chav Zayin? The lamed refers to a lechi, a side post, for the halachas of ervin, as the Gemara says over the end of Tezvav, ha'imin me'elav. If it just was there by itself and you didn't construct it, does that function as a lechi, as a side post, which you need to have for the tzulchas haPesach or not? The kuf is for kedushin shalei nimtzul lebiyah, as the Gemara discussed in kedushin of Nanal from an alf. If you have a kedushin that you cannot do biyah, let's say you didn't, it's one of two sisters, you don't know who it is, you're not going to be able to have biyah with her. Is that considered as a kedushin or not? The gimel refers to gilu daita begita, that if you reveal your intention regarding that you don't want this to be a get, is that considered as a bittul of the get or not, as the Gemara discussed in Gittin of Lamadal and Alf? And the mem refers to a mummer, a rebellious Jew who eats not kosher lahaches to anger God. Does he become puzzled regarding ages, regarding testimony or not? As the Gemara discussed in Gittin of Lamadal and Alf, regarding those 6 halachas, generally we rule like Rava. In 6 places, the exception is that we rule like Abaya, and this is one of them regarding Yish Lemidas, that we showed you that even when there's no siman, there are cases that you would have to return it because the guy doesn't know about it. And although he would be miyayish, but he doesn't know about it, so it's Yish Lemidas, and therefore we see Loi Haba Yish. That ends the Gemara's discussion and answers the question. Now, based on this, the Gemara has the following question. Amalei Rav Acha Berei de Rava Rav Ashi says, now that we have refuted Rava, that if a person's not aware, we say that it's not Yish, even though he would have been Miyayish, because we refuted Rava, we don't hold like him. Sahani Tamri Dezika. So regarding these wind-blown dates, that the wind blows them off. When we find it, people look around, people eat it. How do we eat it? But the guy doesn't know about it yet. Yeah, he would be Miyayish, but he doesn't know. So how do we eat it? So Rashi just explains, the Taisa also discusses, he says that why are we picking this question specifically after Rava was refuted? He says, what do you mean? I find that difficult. Even without Rava being refuted, you could ask the question, because Rava agrees, and we mentioned this on the previous daf, that anything that its appearance is evident on it, that, let's say you know that it's from that olive grove or whatever, that the guy would not be miyayish, even according to Rava, except for the figs, because we said that becomes, squashed when it falls. So that's where we would say he would be miyayish. But generally, a guy would not be miyayish. So these are dates, and you could tell that it's from the guy's, from his tree. So he wouldn't be miyayish, and therefore, even according to Rava, there would be a valid question. Says Rashi, yeah, it says the only reason why we're saying it now is just we're adding on to the severity of the problem. In other words, now that we refuted Rava, if that's the case, then even by something that does not have a siman, you're telling me it's going to be aser, because the guy doesn't know about it. For sure, these should be forbidden because they actually have a siman. Because people know which tree it fell from. See, right, according to Rashi, it's not specific to what the Gemara is saying now. It's just doubling down and saying, well, now it's really difficult. So on that Amar Lei, so he said back to them, Rav Ashi responded, he says, since there are bugs and vermin over there, the ka'achlahu that eat the dates when they fall down, me'ikara, from the beginning, meaning before they fall, yi'ushe miyayish minayu, the owner already gave up hope because he knows that the wind will blow off some of them, and that the bugs are ready there to pounce on these dates, and therefore, it's already considered yish from before, and that's why we're allowed to eat these wind-blown dates. And that says the Gemara, but wait a second. He asked me, what do you do with minor orphans? They are not people that could pardon. They cannot declare and activate a halach of hefker. What would you say over there? Well, that should be aser, because they can't be moichel and be mafker. It's still their possession. So Amalei says, yeah, but Baga, valley, and this is very important. Someone asked after the shiur yesterday, like, how do you know certain things? A valley, out of the Yasmi, in a field of orphans, we don't presume that in the whole valley that there's going to be a property owned by minor orphans to say that, old dates are forbidden because maybe it's a property of orphans. We go after majority. And majority are not orphans. But says the Gemara, but muchzik va'aymed mai. What's the halacha if you know this property is owned by orphans? What would the halacha be? So you know, and that's you have this question sometimes. We say, oh, harei shaloi, because the guy would be miyash. What happens if you know it's not like that? What happens if you know this is owned by orphans? They cannot be miyash. Or let's say karachta. What happens if you have these palm trees that are surrounded? That's karachta, like karuchen. It's surrounded with a stone wall all around where the bugs can't get in. What would you say over there? So Amalei said, you're right. Asidon. In that case, it would be forbidden because the guy wouldn't be miyash. So if you know definitively that's not like that, then in the Chanami, then things would be forbidden. Oftentimes when we say halacha, we say in general, in under normal circumstances. But if you know that it's orphans, that they cannot be meichel, if it's surrounded with stones, then it would be usher. Now going back to the halacha of our Mishnah, case number 3, we said krichis b'rishus harab. We said if someone finds sheaves, bundles, small bundles in the street, a guy could keep it. Now the Gemara brings a machlekes how to qualify this case of krichis b'rishus harab. So Amar Rabbi says, "Vafilu b'davar shish b'simon." Says even if this bundle is, let's say, knotted, it's tied with a certain knot that would be a simon, still these bundles you could keep. Says Gemara Almuk Sabar Rabba. So obviously we see that Rabba holds simon ha'asel l'darais if it's a sign that would be made to be trampled on, meaning if the place where it is, people generally are walking everywhere, and it's a very low down object and very easy to be trampled, lo have a simon. That's not qualified as a simon, meaning the owner does not rely on giving a simon to identify his small bundle, because he says probably the simon already got destroyed by people stepping on my object. So he's like, okay, it's like as if it doesn't have a simon, and therefore he's meyayish, and therefore that's why even though it has a simon, the one who finds it could keep it. That's how Rabbah holds. Rava, he disagrees. Says no, we didn't learn this halacha by simon. These krichais generally don't necessarily have an identifying feature. That's when he said, if you find the small bundle, you can keep it. But if it has a simon, yeah, if you find this street, you would have to call it out. Says the Gemara, Rava, obviously Rava holds, simon asladaris, even though it's a sign that could be trampled on, however, simon, it still can be considered as an identifying feature. Now, so we just said this teaching based on qualifying the halacha of our Mishnah. There are those who said over this teaching on its own, meaning not as an explanation of the halacha of the Mishnah in general. Simon asladaris. We're going to assign that is meant that could be trampled on. We have this machlekes Rabba Amaloi have a simon. He says it's not a simon. But Rabba have a simon. Rabba says it is a simon. Now that's the machlekes. So the Gemara wants to bring a raya to Rabba that it's not a simon from the halacha of our Mishnah, because it's not. We learned in the Mishnah that it says krichis b'rishus harab. These small bundles in the street. That's obviously the case we're talking about. But he's going to bring a raya, so you could keep it. Now the seifa of our Mishnah says b'rishus hayachid, meaning the next Mishnah. If you find it in a private domain, for example, let's say in someone's planted field where most people don't usually walk over there. There's very few people that walk over there. Then we say noit l'machris. Then you have to take it and call it out. So says the Gemara like this. We'll prove Rabbah, because heichidami. What's the case talking about? This krichos, which in the street you can keep it, in the private domain you have to call it out. What's the case of these krichos? Idalas b'simin. If it's like Rava said that there's no simon, so I understand why in the street you can keep it. But b'shus yochid my machris, if you find it in the private domain, what are you calling out? In other words, when this kid calls out, I found a lost object, what's it calling out? That the guy who lost it could give a simon. There's no simon. So what are you calling out in Rishus HaYachid? Ella, rather, obviously, you would say, this bu simon. Must be talking about these bundles have a simon. And that's what you're calling it Rishus HaYachid. Oh, okay. I could tell you, what does the Mishnah say? Bishus Ram in the street, you could keep it. Okay? You see like Rabbah. That simon, that when it has a simon, ha'asla doris, but since it's in the Rishus Ram where it's going to be trampled on, you see lo have a simon. It's not considered as a simon. That's why you could keep it. You have to do Rava. There refutes Rava. Rava said that simon asla doris is a simon. You see clearly from the inference of the Seifa, they were talking about it has a simon, and in Rishus Ram, you could keep it because it's going to be trampled on. Samachar Rava would tell you no. Lo the less bu simon. Truthfully, there's no simon, because like we said, if it had a simon, Rishus Ram, you would have to call it out. Udikama with this that you say Mishus Yochid my Machar. So wait a second, if there's no simon, how do we understand the Seifa? How do we understand in private domain you call it out? What are you calling out? The guy has no simon. Says Rava Machar is Makam. You're going to call out the place, meaning the guy who finds it is not calling out the object that he found. He's calling out the name of the place. He says, whoever lost something on the corner of Brick and Maple Street should come and say, what did he lose? And this guy's going to come and say, I lost an umbrella. So even though there's no simon, and that's why in the Rishus Rabbim, which we'll discuss in a second, that you keep it, because if it had a simon, you would not be able to keep it, because he holds simon asadaras is a simon. So then what in Rishus Yachad you being machers? You being machers the makim. Well, it's not even, he's not giving the simon actually a makim the way we're understanding right now. The guy who's finding it is calling out the place, and the guy's saying what the object was. And that's the way he's going to identify it. But says the Gemara of Varabama, he would say, because he disagrees, he says, and Toys actually explains it's really lishitasai. He says, no, makom lo have a simon. The place is not a simon. I mean, in other words, the bottom Toys says that since Rabbah holds makom is not a simon, so then the case of Rishus Yachid must mean that you literally have a simon. That's why he has to say simon as ladaris of the ratio is not a simon, because they're intertwined. He holds makom is not a simon, so then by default, then you have to say that it has a real simon, and if it has a real simon, that means Rishus Rabbim that you can keep it even with a real simon. That's why he has to say simon as ladaris is lo have a simon. This that we learned. This is their machlekes. Makom regarding place is a machlekes. Rabba Amma lo have a simon. Rava Amma have a simon, meaning he's not really saying it. The guy's calling out the place, but when you're saying your object, you're identifying that you knew the place because you're saying what your object is. That's the makom if it's a simon or not. So therefore, that's their machlekes, and it's that's l'shitasam Rabba and Rava. How do you explain the halacha of the Mishnah? Krichas Rishus Rabbim. If there is a simon or there's no simon, would depend on this halacha of simon as l'daris, if it's a simon or not, which also depends on if you hold if makom is a simon or not. So you must say, okay, Tashema, let's bring a brayse that seems to be difficult on both Rabba and Rava. Why? Because the brayse says krichas b'shus Rabbim. If you have these bundles in the public domain, in the street, you find it harei l'shlo, you could keep it. B'shus Yachid, as we said, nitla machers, you have to take it and call it out. That we know already. The brayse is adding on another dimension. V'alumos, large bundles, krichas are small bundles, lumas are large bundles. Oh, then says the brayse, b'mishus Rabbim, b'mishus Yachid, whether in the street or in the private area, nitla machers, you have to take it and call it out. Says the Gemara, Rabba, who says that the reason in the street by krichas that you could keep it is because it gets trampled on. How's he going to explain by alumos, by the large bundles, it gets trampled on? So why there do you have to call it out? Simon asal does lo have a simon. And for Rava, that explains the case of krichas, because he holds simon asal is a simon. He has to explain the case of krichas you could keep it because there's no simon. So what's simon to krichas on alumos? Alumos also has no simon. So why would you have to call it out in the street? So the Gemara explains yes. Rabbi Metaretz L'Tamei. Rabbi explains according to his reasoning that the reason when, let's say, in the Rishus HaYachid, by krichas, that you have to give it back is because of simon. He explains b'simon. That we're talking about that it has a simon. But Rabbi Metaretz L'Tamei, Rabbi explains according to his reasoning that the reason why by it's b'makim, that the reason why krichas in Rishus HaYachid that you have to give it back is because of the place, but it's something that has no simon, as the Gemara explains. Rabbi explains according to his reasoning that he said, yes, the halacha by Mishnah krichas is even with a simon, like he said, because generally when it gets trampled on, it's not going to be considered as a simon. Krichas b'shus Rama, the reason why when you find small bundles in the street that you can keep it, the medrasa, because it's a simon asladar, so we explain. It gets trampled on, and therefore it's not a simon. Oh, but that in the private, someone's field, you have to call it out. The limit is it doesn't get stepped on. Very few people walk over there. But that's what the Bride is saying about Lumas. The big bundles, they're even in the street, you have to call it out. Even the Gevion, since they're tall, they're big bundles, it doesn't get trampled on, even in the street. And that's why you have to call it out. That's how Rabbi is going to explain it. But Rabbi says, no, there's no simon. And he said that the reason why by krichas and Rishus HaYachid you had to call it out was because of the place. So he explains. Regarding small bundles in the street, we said that you could keep it. Why isn't makom a similar like a Rishus Yachid? That's because the benashtafa, because it gets kicked around by people's feet and animals. It's not found in the place where it was originally, so makom is not going to be a simon. But in someone's private area, you have to call it out because the benashtafa. So although there's no simon, but makom is a simon because it doesn't get kicked around. That's what we're saying about lumas. But the big bundles, whether in the street or in the private area, you have to take and call it out because kivin the kire. Since they're heavy, they're big bundles, they're not going to get kicked around, and therefore makom is going to be a simon even in Rishus Rabbim, and therefore it's not difficult, not on Rabbah, not on Rava, regarding the halacha of that, how they explain of the krichis, if it's with a simon or without a simon. Thank you to any time for hosting us.